Welcome to the APWASI Wine Buzz interview. Today's guest is Amanda McCrossin. She is a wine media influencer, personality. She is also the former press wine director and the Napa Valley insider. Now, there's so much more to Amanda. So, Amanda, would you share with us those inner secrets and let our viewers know a little bit more about you?
Of course. Well, happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I'm Amanda McCrossin. I was born and raised outside of Philadelphia, where I'm joining you from right now, which is not normally my home. But I caught the wine bug while I was living in New York City. My background is actually in film and TV and musical theater. That's what my degree is in. So I caught the wine bug when I was living in Manhattan and was trained by a sommelier who really encouraged me early on to pursue a career in wine. And I was very, very lucky to have met him so early into my career and have a lot of doors opened. But long story short, I ended up running a program in New York and then got the opportunity to move out to California to work with the Press wine list in St. Helena. And Press at the time had the largest, deepest collection of Napa Valley wines in the world for a restaurant. And it was being helmed by Scott Brenner and Kelly White. And Kelly, of course, has gone on to do incredible things, as has Scott. But Kelly is, of course, famous for writing the Napa Valley Then and Now book. And it's really a comprehensive, almost comprehensive guide to the Napa Valley, and really dives into vintages of old Napa Valley wine, which is what we were opening day in and day out at the restaurant. So I had the great privilege of spending years diving into old vintages of Chapelet and Inglenook and the original vintages of BV made by Andrei Telechev. So I had a really great time there. And that's really where my career started to blossom as a sommelier. And then also at the same time, I started my now business, my full-time business, which is Somm Vivant. So I have an Instagram and a YouTube channel, and I am a wine communicator. And you just listed off my bio, which is way too long for my liking. But it really is kind of tough to figure out what it is I actually do these days.
You know, Amanda, you are not only humble as you are glamorous, effervescent, and you certainly spark that interest in wine. Now, you mentioned that there was a certain individual that really, would you say, ignited you to get into this wine career?
Absolutely. I was lucky to be working at a place called the Core Club. It was on 55th between Park and Madison. You'd walk by it a million times if you didn't know it was there, but it is a premier and private exclusive club for very wealthy people. And I was, of course, working a side job as most actresses do. And he was a sommelier that had worked at Le Bernardin. He had worked all over the world, really. And he had started at Core Club. And I just sort of poked at him one night and I had questions about wine, being a 25-year-old girl, not knowing anything about the world, but I loved food and I loved traveling. But wine was just this thing that I hadn't quite gotten a grip on yet. And so I started asking him some questions, and he took that as his opportunity to open up the world. And he asked me a few questions back and said, come back with the answers tomorrow and we'll continue the conversation. And that really was what sparked everything. We just started having these conversations, and he took me under his wing and uh, also took the liberty of enrolling me in classes for the American Sommelier Association. Before I knew it, I was spending every Monday morning for about 3 hours in a viticulture and vinification class, and found myself completely enamored with the topic and with the subject. So it was an incredibly difficult amount of study because a lot of it was self-study, as so many wine professionals will know, but I loved it. It was never ending, and it was all encompassing. I got to learn about so many things around the world. And then of course you're drinking incredible wine and tasting things you'd never have access to. So yes, it was he that got me into it and was really responsible for that initial push.
So I think the world of wine media and the podcasts, we should give a huge thanks to this person, because after rattling off an array of spectacular wines and wineries, we have to stop our sort of salivation because you've had that experience. And I know through my own personal experience that when you are learning about wine, it, it creates a sort of insatiable desire to want to learn more and more.
Mhm.
And when you are involved in that, you become more perceptive to people's tastes, and I'm sure you have. So, although you're from Philadelphia, which is one of the very sort of premier and highly respected cities in the United States, and then you have the Big Apple, New York City, very close by. Amanda, share with us what major differences that you noticed in the consumer wine selection in New York City as compared to Napa. What was the main
Mm.
differences?
It's such a great question because there are huge differences. Although I think maybe as the years have gone on, the differences are getting less and less, especially as the lines are being blurred in terms of styles of winemaking. But
Mhm.
to be perfectly candid, when I started as a sommelier learning about wine in New York City, it really wasn't a cool thing, so to speak, to be drinking Napa Valley wines. I mean, New York is so European focused. I cut my teeth on the great Bordeaux's and Burgundy, Italian, Champagne, even the small producers in the Loire Valley. I mean, New York is a place where most of those European wines are hitting first before they make it out to California, with, of course, various exceptions. But it really is the hub to drink European wine in the United States. And so, as a sommelier, and of course, as a consumer by extension, it is a place that really dives into European wine and embraces it in a way that I have never seen anywhere else in the country. Now, Napa is sort of a different place. I mean, it's a place that is, of course, Californians want to drink what's in their own backyard, but living in Napa Valley, you do have access to wines that are made in California that you don't
Mhm.
have access to in New York City. And so I made the mistake while I was living in New York City, of course, unbeknownst to me at the time, of thinking that California wines, and specifically Napa Valley, were all one sort of monolith. They were all
Mm.
one thing, all made in the same style, big, heavy alcohols, big tannins, sort of these big monstrosities that were intended to be paired with steaks and, consumed with big meals, big lavish meals. But when I moved out to Napa Valley and I started really digging into not only the styles of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but also diving into producers that were a little bit smaller, that really weren't seeing the exposure or getting the exposure that other bigger wineries were getting in New
Of
York
course.
City, I realized that there really was a broad array of different winemaking styles, and there was so much more to California than I had experienced. And so that mistake that I made was one that I was quickly humbled by as I lived in California and started drinking these wines. But California, Napa Valley, it's made up of mostly wine professionals. So of course we drink what's in our own backyard, but we're also insatiable in terms of our curiosity for wanting to taste lots of different things. So you'd be hard pressed to go to any sort of winemaker's house or dinner with wine professionals and see anything but a broad array or representation of the entire world on the table. So you'll see Burgundy, you'll see Champagne, but you'll definitely see what's being made in Napa Valley as well. And I think that's really special and really what has allowed me to expand my own personal palate is drinking all of these wines and looking at them with a broader lens.
Certainly. So there's that unquestionable pride that, Napa Valley vintners take in appreciating their wine, and quite rightly so. I mean, movies like Bottle Shock, The Judgment of Paris, they've all really brought to the consumer the forefront of Napa Valley, which is now a highly respected wine area. Now, Amanda, you've been featured on Food and Wine magazine, Food Network, the cover of Somm Journal, and most recently by The Wine Enthusiast as the Wine Star nominee for Sommelier of the Year. So, what do you feel contributed to all of this? There's certain elements of success, and to me, you are the rising star of the next generation. What contributed to that success, and what advice would you give to the cohorts that are going to follow you?
Wow. Well, thank you. um, you know, I think I learned quickly, but maybe too late, that the only way that I was going to survive in this industry was by being open-minded, by being aware that you're never going to know everything and it's okay to not know everything. In fact, that's where the fun lives in this industry, is in not
Yes.
knowing everything. So my advice would be to remain curious, remain open-minded, allow yourself the opportunity to think outside the confines or the constraints of what people tell you and form your own opinions about things. I think one of the things that we do very quickly, because whether we like to admit it or not, wine can be a very unnerving topic. It's a subject that makes a lot of us uncomfortable, and not knowing it sort of makes us feel less than, or feel like an outsider. So living in that space and knowing that it's okay to not know things, and go through your career knowing that eventually you'll know a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then a little bit more, I think is the way that you really become a well-rounded wine professional. My success, I don't know what I attribute it to. I feel like I worked hard, but I also feel like I had a lot of luck. I met a lot of people. Living in Napa Valley is certainly one of the epicenters of wine in the United States, if not the epicenter. And so I was very fortunate to meet people that opened a lot of doors, but I also was, I feel like, very receptive to that. I feel like I asked a lot of questions, and I I hope that I can repay the favors that people have paid to me. So, the other thing is I came up through the acting, the acting background that I had, and so I'm used to a lot of rejection. So I guess that's maybe part of it, as well as being, knowing that people are going to say no probably more times than they're going to say yes, and that's okay too.
Yes, but I think your musical background, theatrical background, that has given you fortitude. It's given you the determination and the unyielding strength to say, you know what, if I'm rejected, that's fine. I'm going to continue forward. So I know that it's inevitable that your star will continue rising, Amanda.
Thank
Now,
you.
having been on the inside, as it were, in Napa Valley, you worked there for a last couple of years. What were, in your opinion, was the effect of the earthquake and the fires over the last number of years on the wines?
Yeah, the earthquake was actually just before I landed in Napa Valley. But when I arrived, it was obviously something that people were still talking about.
Hmm.
And as for the fires, I mean, that was 2017. So that was 2 years after I got there. Um, I think, what it did in the short term was what both of them did was reminded us all that we are at the mercy of Mother Nature always. And it isn't just weather. It is, sometimes it's fires, sometimes it's earthquakes. And living in California, you're definitely susceptible to all of those things. As far as, what the effects will be, I think we're we're always looking for new opportunities to reinvent ourselves. If you look at the history of Napa Valley, that's been an ongoing theme for the last century and a half, whether it's phylloxera or prohibition or economic struggle. We've always sort of had these things that have happened that were, of course, negative at the time, but that we emerged with a silver lining. And I think the fires, the earthquake, perhaps even COVID, will all be things that, help to reshape and re-identify us as a region. I think one of the really, really cool things about California and Napa Valley is our ability to be our own thing. We're not hindered by the history and some of the laws that exist in other regions. And so we have that opportunity to literally rise from the ashes like a phoenix, right? And I think that it's an opportunity that we all take advantage of. We all work together as a community. I think it's one of the most trite and oversaid things, but it is so true. It is an incredibly tight-knit community that we have in Napa Valley, all over California. You go to any wine region in California, they'll say the same thing. We all help each other. We're all family. We all work together. There are no secrets. There are no private things that we don't share with others. We're always here to help a lending hand, and we saw that every single time with every fire, whether it was in Sonoma or Mendocino or Napa Valley or Paso. we're all here to help each other. So I think that's a really great thing to see in times of crisis. And then in terms of the actual wines themselves, there's so much that we don't know about smoke taint.
Mm.
We're still learning. We're still trying to understand. We're still trying to borrow information from Australia, who has, of course, been through this many, many times before. But as far as what will happen with the actual wines, I think 2020 is going to be a very difficult vintage to release for a lot of producers. I've already heard that many producers will not be releasing a 2020. So I guess we'll see. I think that is one of those things that we'll just have to be ready. If the wine's released, then great, and if they don't, then that's Mother
So be
Nature
it.
for you.
So be it. That's what the wine gods decide.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. The sentiments that you have expressed, Amanda, that, the community, the togetherness, it resonates, I believe, not only within the Napa Valley wine community, but certainly in many wine communities around the world. Whenever there are students or there are guests that I'm giving a talk to, I always say to them that, having been in several different industries, it is the wine industry where you find some of the most pleasant and warm-hearted and welcoming community. Of course, one does have the rather obnoxious characters, which one will always have, but generally, I'm sure you would agree with me on that.
Absolutely. And aren't we both so lucky to be working in this industry?
I think we must have done something right in our lives before.
I think
So,
so.
yes, indeed. So, you mentioned how when you started your studies and you learnt about wine and you've drunk so many different wines from various countries and continents. Would you say that through wine, your understanding and knowledge of the world, its history and customs and culture, has been expanded through your studies of wine?
Oh, of course. I think if they're not, you're probably doing it wrong, right? Yeah, I mean, wine is a complete history of the world. That was one of the things that drew me to it. Initially, of course, it's you swirl your glass, you sip the wine, it's delicious, you feel very fancy. But then as you really dive into the history of how these things actually happened, you can't help but to want to learn more and more and more and more. And yes, I think one of the things that I discovered early-ish was my first trip to another wine region in the Languedoc, and I
Okay.
realized that culture and wine are married. In those regions, that is where what grows together goes together comes from. They are one and the same, and there's a reason some of these wines taste the way that they do, and they go with the foods that they do, and that's as a lover of the world and as a lover of travel, those things are just they captivate me. I mean, they're the things that make me want to get on a plane and fly 15 hours across the world to go see another culture. And wine really is the catalyst for that. It can be such a time capsule, but it can also be a portal to a whole other world. And that is just, I mean, that's the most special thing. And to me, being in this industry is my ability
Absolutely.
to see both.
Absolutely. When you pick up that bottle and perhaps it's 50 years old, you sort of tend to think, my goodness, what was it like when they made this wine? And, you know, your ideas, your thoughts. Now, you are obviously very successful on social media, Amanda. So, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, how important has it been for you to have platforms like the TikTok, Instagram, or the YouTube to propel and grow your career to where it is today?
Oh, I mean, it can't be any other number but 10, right? Uh, these things are everything. I mean, it is a way to access the world. It's a way to be a sommelier at scale. It's a way to learn. I mean, if you're not learning from other people, halfway across the world, they're asking you questions. That's an opportunity to become a better wine professional, to become a better sommelier. But of course, it's been hugely instrumental to my career something that I think I probably adopted on the earlier side for the wine industry, but something that I'm so excited that the rest has kind of come up and caught on to. Certainly after the world shut down, social media became a huge instrument. And so I'm so thankful that we have it, because if we didn't, I'm not sure where we would be right now. I'm not sure that we would have the success, or the wineries would have had the success that they did in those months where we couldn't have visitors to Napa Valley, where we couldn't have guests in our restaurant. It was a way to communicate with each other. And to me, that's everything. I mean, wine is meant to be shared amongst humans and enjoyed amongst friends. And that's really what social media allows us to do. And of course, TikTok gives us a little more fun. We get to express ourselves in new ways and fun ways. And if you're not having fun while you're doing this, then I don't know why you're in this industry, because it is the most fun.
I totally agree with you. But Amanda, there is a plethora. There's an army, a vast horde of aspiring social media influencers, but yet it's always those few that rise to the top. If you were to share perhaps 2 or 3 strategies, what would you share with those within the group that want to break away and aspire to be someone like you? What advice would you give them?
Well, there's 2 mantras that I live by that I think are perhaps applicable here. One comes from when I was back in my acting days, and I had a great coach who always said, and my mom used to love to drum it down, always made sure that she reminded me of this. And he always said, you're always on an audition, where no matter where you are, who you're with, what you're doing, you're always on an audition. And that, I think, has really kept me alive and awake and aware of what it is that I'm posting. It has always been something in my brain that I don't think that I can turn off, where, for me, this has always been something that I've always wanted to communicate with the world, right? I've always wanted to have this voice. And so if I'm auditioning to be able to do that on a daily basis, that's what I keep in mind. And I would encourage others who are maybe going down the same path to figure out what it is that you want to communicate with the world, and remember that they're always watching. No matter what you're putting out there, they're always watching. The other mantra is a more recent one that I came across a few years ago, from Steve Martin, of all people, one of my favorite actors. And he said, I think he was talking about coming up in the 70s as an actor, and he said, "Be so good they can't ignore you." And I love that. I think that, again, encapsulates what it, because it's not just hard work. A lot of people put in hard work. It's not just luck, but to be good enough to where you think that you're good. And it's not an ego thing, but to really put out content that you think is great, that you think is good enough to share with the world. Eventually that cream does rise to the top. Eventually they won't be able to ignore you. Eventually you will get to where you want to be. And so I've lived by that. Be so good they can't ignore you. Now, the other part of, the other third tip I guess I would give is be open and adaptable. These platforms it's technology. It changes at a much more rapid pace than wine ever will. And for that reason, you need to be willing and able to port yourself over to whatever that next platform is, to whatever the next trend is. Don't resist the change, embrace the change, have fun, smile, go with it, be whoever that authentic self is to you on whatever platform that is working at the time. And right now TikTok is the platform of the era. It is, something that I probably fought for too long, and I'm loving. I really, really enjoy being on TikTok. It's still relatively new, but it's so much fun. I think once you sort of twist your mind around the fact that it's not just people dancing to songs or lip singing things, that you can actually add value, which is, maybe the other thing is I'm always trying to add value. You can have a lot of fun while doing it if you have that exercise, that creative constraint within each various platform.
Oh, I think the premise and your philosophy, improvise, adapt, innovate, be determined. I love it. I love the aspect of always you are auditioning.
Mhm.
I think that is a wonderful a principle for aspiring social media. In fact, anyone who wants to aspire to success should take heed of those words. Now, I create content, you create content, and we know that it is an art. It is not something, and having a theatrical background certainly has its advantages. But yet, there's always that ideal space that you need to have to create that content. Where do you happen to do that? Is it sort of when you're relaxing, you're having a glass of wine, your feet are up, it's been a hard day, or is there a certain space that you think, right, don't disturb me. This is Amanda at work, and this is how I'm going to find my content.
You
How?
know, I wish that I wish I had like a good answer because I think some people do, they're like, I work really well from, this hour to this hour. I will say that in my life, because I think I've always been on a sort of acting schedule or restaurant schedule, my brain does tend to turn on in that like 3 to 7 area, when you'd either be like on stage or on the floor as a
Right,
som.
right, right, right.
But no, I think like when it comes to creating content, I I don't know. I mean, I think sometimes like I've woken up in the morning, like I put out a reel or a TikTok a couple months ago, and I was in the car. I'll never forget. I was in the car driving in South Florida. I had Justin Bieber on the radio or on Spotify, I guess, and I had this song Peaches, and I'm listening to it, and I was
Okay.
like, this is a cool jam. Listening to the lyrics, and I'm sitting there. I'm like, oh my gosh. I was like, he's talking about terroir. And it was at 10 o'clock in the morning in the middle of South Florida, driving down the freeway. And I was like, and that was where my inspiration struck. So, I mean, I guess it can come from anywhere. I don't think there's any one particular place, but I do like quiet. I do like to have my own space. I don't, I'll definitely ask people to stay out of the way if I'm in a shared space. I don't like to have an audience when I'm creating content,
Mhm.
but it happens when it happens. You get it done, and you know how it goes. When you're
I know
creating
how it goes.
content, you just get it done, however you can, whether that's on a plane or in the car or in a studio by yourself.
It could even just be a particular word that someone is having a conversation with. Right, I have it. I know what you're talking about. And
Exactly.
so, you know, there are different generations. There's millennials. We hear about the Gen X and Z. And Amanda, is there a particular audience you cater for, and why?
Well, my Instagram and YouTube demographics would suggest yes.
Okay.
Um, Instagram suggests that I work well between the ages of 25 and 45, mostly female, but only
Hmm.
by a hair. And then YouTube, which is actually a more male dominated platform, that skews a little bit older and is a heavily male demographic. But who I cater to, I guess, who my avatar is that I'm always speaking to,
Mm.
that never changes. Who's watching may change, but that never changes. And that is most certainly my 25-year-old, 26-year-old self, who was very hungry for information, who didn't want it distilled down too much, but who didn't want someone to speak to her in a pedantic way. And so I always sort of keep that woman in mind, that girl in mind, living in New York, hungry for information. Give me the facts, but not too quickly, and in a way that I can digest, and leave feeling like I learned a little something in the process. That's always been my motivating avatar person, whatever you want to call it.
That's spectacularly insightful, Amanda. From that young 25-year-old New York City bred uh, girl that you mentioned to now, a very successful lady who is still on the rise. What has been the most challenging aspect for you in your career so far?
Uh, um, you know, I suspect you probably go through. I think everyone goes through this, but I guess I'm an entrepreneur now, and I guess to some extent I've always been an entrepreneur or intrapreneur. And the trajectory as we're talking about it right now looks like this, right? It's
Of
this
course.
like up and to the right. But the reality of that trajectory is really more like this, right? Peaks and valleys. And there are very low lows and there are very high highs. And I still experience them every single day. I mean, 2 days ago, really great news. Yesterday, not so great news. And so those those are the challenges that I think come on a more daily basis or more frequent basis that I find myself having to work through personally. I've of course, I'm sure, experienced the same setbacks that most people have
Hmm.
in any career. And so there are challenges, but I don't think they're unique, nor do I think that what I'm experiencing is unique. But I think that the challenges that I experience, on this more frequent day-to-day basis are the ones where you start to doubt yourself a little bit, where you're not validated by the people that you thought should be validating you. And so those are the challenges that I think are the most difficult, but also the ones that you just kind of have to learn to embrace at a certain point. They feel not great at the time, but I've definitely gotten used to the fact that they're going to happen and the sun will come out tomorrow. It will be okay. So yeah.
But what I would like to share with the audience is, you know, you are polished, you are sophisticated, you are glamorous. But I'm sure that many people don't realize how hard the hardships that you've experienced, as you mentioned, the ups and the downs. And yet it's the resilience that you have that has taken you to where you are. And that's why I sincerely believe that this is only the beginning for you, Amanda.
Oh, I
So,
appreciate that. Thank you. Yeah.
absolutely.
Someone will always be there to tell you that you're not good enough, that you're not worthy, and that you don't belong here. And that's
Oh,
okay.
I'm sure you have literally thousands of comments that come from the social
Oh,
media.
YouTube
How
is
do you
brutal.
deal
I'm
with
sure
that?
you know that.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. How do you deal with it? Do you,
Oh,
you know?
I laugh now, but there was a period where I really got upset. Yeah, I mean, mostly I'll just screenshot them and send them to my family because they kind of get a kick out of it, and then we can all laugh together. But you know, you, it comes with the territory, right? You put yourself out there, whether
Yes.
it's on stage or whether it's on YouTube. You put yourself out
Mhm.
there. You're not always going to get a positive response. That's
Yeah,
life.
you're right. And I think what's remarkable is some of the comments that one would never have thought would have left someone's brain, let alone transport onto their fingertips, and to
Yes.
actually write it down.
Yeah. It's
But,
amazing what happens when you've got a screen between you and another person.
but now, onto something else. Amanda, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
Well, I'll just get out my crystal no, I'm just kidding. Oh, man, in 5 years, I hope that, I hope I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
No,
In 5
that's
years,
fine because you flow. Hmm.
yeah, I have a lot of business ideas. But honestly, I say this with all sincerity. I looked at my life the other day. I had the coolest day the other day. I posted on Instagram. I got to board a private jet through it was a Wheels Up's Boeing business jet,
Yeah, I
737.
saw that. I
Yeah.
saw that.
I got to board a jet. I had flown down that morning to Palm Beach. I boarded the jet. I poured some wine. I got off, and that was my day. My life right now is such that I can do those things. Like when Wheels Up calls me and says, "Can you do this?" I can say yes. When I worked at a restaurant, I didn't have that luxury.
Of
But
course.
now I get to travel all the time. I got to go to Aspen and be a speaker at the Food and Wine Classic. I
Yes.
mean, when I say that I'm living my best life, I really truly mean it. I get to do all of the things that I dreamed of doing as a 25-year-old female in New York City. And I'm so, so, so lucky. I think like I'm sort of tempting fate by even trying to speculate where I might be in 5 years. I'd love to own, some sort of brick and mortar business. I'd love to have, some sort of commerce. But the reality is, I'm loving where I am right now. And I'd love to just be able to continue on whatever this trajectory is that seems to reveal itself in due time.
Yeah, and you are literally carpe diem,
Yeah.
seizing the day. So
Exactly.
that's splendid. That's splendid. Now, I'm often asked the question, which I'm going to ask you. And I would love to know, what's your favorite wine and pairing, Amanda?
Well, my favorite wine pairing, and this is like me because I don't always put on a black blazer and slick my hair back for everything. My favorite is when I'm like in my sweats, my PJs, probably in a robe because I own about 10 of them. I'm a sucker for robes. I love robes. In a robe, a glass of Chardonnay, and a bowl of popcorn, and that's my happy place. So
Okay,
yeah.
okay. I mean, and I think that really just shows the openness, the flexibility of your character, and the length and breadth of the experience that you've had. And
Maybe.
I think it's so heartwarming to hear that. Now,
Yeah.
Amanda, do you feel that understanding different cultures and history is important, especially when learning about wine? And why would you say so?
Oh, it's imperative. I mean, to truly understand wine is to understand the culture. I mean, it is to understand it. Like it goes back to what I said before with what grows together goes together, and that first moment in the Languedoc, really seeing the people and how they embrace each other and cook with each other and the sort of literal je ne sais quoi, feel of that region.
Right,
That is a culture. You go to Greece and you understand that there is a culture there. There is a reason that these wines are being made the way that they are. You can feel that energy in a wine, and not in any sort of, maybe there is sort of an energy that I'm not privy to, but I feel like to understand a wine's personality, and I do believe wines have personalities in tandem with their flavors and their textures. They do have a sort of personality energy that they give off. That is to understand the reasoning, the psychology, the culture behind the decisions that were made to farm that land, to make that wine, to bottle it in the way they did, to choose that label. And I think that is part of wine. That is part of why we spend $30 on a bottle of wine and don't reach for the $5 jug wine. That's okay too. But if we're talking about the kinds of wines that we're talking about, that is kind of why we pay the premium, is to feel that culture, to feel that personality that exists within the wine.
that's amazing. I would just like to end off, Amanda, with a quotation from my late father, who said that if you love life, don't waste time, for that is what life is made up of. And I'd like to share with the viewers that they are seeing through you a true example of someone who's taking each moment and time and living it to the fullest and wanting to achieve the best. So, from us here at the APWASI Wine Buzz interview, we wish you the very best, and you have been a great, great guest of ours, and it's been our enormous pleasure to have interviewed you. And we wish you continued success, Amanda, in all your endeavors, and we will be watching out for you. Thank you so
Uh,
much.
the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay. Was that okay? So please comment, like, share, or subscribe to our videos.